Hello and welcome to the Supernatural track here at Continual. I'm your host, Gail C. Martin, and tonight we're going to be talking about the heroine's journey. Sure, the boys are the main characters at Supernatural, but there are a lot of badass women as well. And so let's talk about their journey in addition. And before we get into that, let's let our wonderful panelists introduce themselves, starting with Carole.
Hi, I'm Carole Stokes. I'm a fan since season 3. I'm a fanfic writer since 2012. All my fic is on AO3 under Firesign 10, and I love doing continual panels.
Melissa.
I already cracked her up. That's it. We're done.
Yep. Well, because I heard I love Dean continual panels.
Oh.
And so I was like, I was already. Hi, I'm Melissa. When I can talk straight, I'm on Supernatural Continual Panels. I also hang out at the TFWNC Supernatural Facebook group that Gail moderates. Hi, I'll try to be serious tonight. Good luck.
Laurena.
Hi, I'm Laurena Aker for Supernatural. I am the co-editor-in-chief of Winchester Family Business, which is the largest Supernatural fan site online. For the Twilight fandom, I'm the editor of the book Fan Phenomenon, The Twilight Saga. I also have chapters in 2 or 3 different Supernatural books, most notably Family Don't End with Blood and A Supernatural Politics.
Very nice. And I'm Gail C. Martin and Morgan Bryce. As Gail, I write epic and urban fantasy. As Morgan, I write urban fantasy, male paranormal romance, but all the modern worlds are ones where Sam and Dean could walk in and feel right at home. I'm a staff writer for the Winchester Family Business blog, and I wrote a chapter for There'll Be Peace When You Are Done. And in addition to running the Supernatural track at Continual, I also run the Supernatural TFWNC group here on Facebook. So, we hear a lot about Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey, and Supernatural takes us through that many iterations over 15 years. But the heroine's journey differs a little bit. And we had a lot of women who were extremely heroic. So let's start with, what do you see as a difference between the hero's journey and the heroine's journey? Carole.
The heroines tend to die. I'm sorry. A lot of them do not make it all the way through the hero's journey, and at some point derail and they sacrifice themselves. They're collateral damage. They are definitely heroic because they all go down fighting. There's not a one of them that just lies there and goes, oh, woe is me. They're fighting all the way down. But the death rate is really, really high if you are a woman on Supernatural.
Melissa, what do you think? You're muted.
Sorry, Kitty is not being cooperative tonight. How you know you're a heroine on Supernatural? You die. Like, I mean, Eileen was the only one who we think was a heroine who maybe didn't die, because we don't actually see her after the world.
Well, no, she died, but she came back. He died.
You know what? This proves my point. So
if everybody
you're a heroine, you're dead.
If everyone got reconstituted when Jack took over, then Jody and Donna should have still been alive at the end.
Yes, and they're really the ones to me that really have the longest arcs and go the furthest and make it the furthest around here. But, and this isn't to say a lot of men don't die.
I was going to say the
Right.
death rate
Not-
in Supernatural is
not-
pretty high. Yeah, and not to mention just the boys, you know.
But they get
I
to
bought-
keep coming back, so they get to keep kind of rebooting.
I bought the T-shirt that has all of their deaths listed, and I'm going to get a fabric pen and add, you know, plus vampire to both of them because it was pre 1520 T-shirt. Too soon, Lorena?
Always.
I expected when I started looking through the Women of Supernatural to find that they died because of Sam and Dean, but I was actually very surprised when I went through, and I could divide them into categories. You have the heroines that are almost 100% hunters. And the only group that didn't die, as Carole said, were the Wayward Sisters. You get Jody, Donna, and, you know, Claire, Patience, and Alex. They were the ones that didn't die for an obvious reason, because they wanted the spinoff. But if you were a hunter, a female hunter in the show, you died, but you really did die on your own terms. And because of what you were doing and what you chose to do, it wasn't like they were sacrificed to save Sam and Dean. I mean, you can look at like Eileen and Joe, excuse me, Ellen and Joe. They died so that Sam and Dean could go further in the fight, but they were hunters. And even if Sam and Dean weren't there, they probably would have done what they did to sacrifice themselves anyway. So I was actually pretty happy to see that the women, if we're just talking about their deaths, were by their own choice and not in the service of the male protagonists. The one that probably was the only exception was Pamela. She wasn't really a hunter. She kind of got pulled in because of her psychic ability, and she wasn't really hunting when she was killed. She kind of was killed because of Sam and Dean. And that was really the only one. But I think the others, I can say, really had honorable representation for being hunters in their own right.
I so
Well, even
totally concur with that. I totally concur with that these women were strong to the very end. Pamela, yeah, to me, she was collateral damage. She was sucked into events beyond her purview and, you know, and sadly died. And, but yeah, the rest of them went down swinging all the way, you know, Annie, Hawkins, Charlie, all of them, definitely. So they were not afterthoughts, and they weren't like, oh, well, poo-poo. They were strong to the very end and, you know, remarkable.
Well, and both Crowley and Cass make snarky comments along the way to the effect of always happy to bleed for the Winchesters. And they pay a price repeatedly for being in the boys' orbit. They do dangerous work, so being around them is going to be dangerous no matter who you are, even if you're an angel or the king of hell. So let's talk about some of those characters. You know, some of the folks we didn't get to see enough of them to know their arc, like Pamela or even Missouri. We saw them, we liked them. Both of them loom much larger in fan fiction than they got to do in the canon. But we don't really get to know much about their arc. But then there are others who we do. And you mentioned Annie Hawkins. Let's start with the lady in the foxholes.
She was a lucky lady. I really liked her. She just was, she seemed very straightforward, no nonsense. And I can see her having these moments of enjoyment, you know, because she knew life was short. And if she was there with a handsome guy and they were interested in each other, she was not going to, you know, be shy about it. But her too, she was a ghost and she was still fighting. you know, she was a ghost and yet she still, you know, played a large part in solving something that, you know, was being big and ugly and killing people, and then finally going to her own, you know, final resting and stuff. So I thought she was, you know, an admirable character. It would have been great to know more about her, but and I don't even think she's that much explored in fanfic. But there's certainly lots of room there to do that because we know so little about her.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, she struck me very much as a female version of Dean in many ways, in terms of just accepting the role, accepting the risks of the job. And like you
And the
said,
perks.
and the perks, because life is short and shorter than most. And so why would you not? Melissa, what do you think?
You're
You're
muted.
muted.
Sorry. Okay, that's going to be an ongoing thing tonight, I think. I wish they would do a show with all of these side characters. Like the boys could pop in and out, you know, to sort of help the continuity. But I would love to see a show with all of these other characters that we didn't get enough of. So we could have a couple of episodes of filling in Annie's backstory and some more with Missouri. And there's just all of these wonderful characters we didn't see enough of. And it would be really cool to see them. So I agree with what
Yeah.
Carole said about Annie.
Lorena, any thoughts on that?
No, I agree with what they said. It's interesting when you say you'd like to see a show of just, you know, the women. The Winchester Family Business has done probably 4 or 5 articles just on, quote, the badass women of Supernatural. And they have been some of our highest read articles in the history of the site since season 4, just hundreds of thousands of reads. I think people are very interested in reading about the women. So we profile them, depending on what season it is, you know, from all these different articles, we profile the most popular ones, the ones that had the biggest roles or the most recurrence in the show. I don't think Annie was one of the ones that we looked at, honestly, when you mentioned her, but certainly many of the others have very high interest. And you talk about ones that don't have a backstory. One of the things that struck me when I was looking at these women was there were 2 that I wouldn't exactly call, well, one of them was a heroine, the other not so much, but their backstory, they waited way too long to give us the backstory to make them an interesting or sympathetic character. The obvious one is Mary Winchester. I mean, she was a hunter. She died, unfortunately, you know, in an accident, but it was trying to get too close to a god, basically. Her backstory that they gave in her epilogue made everybody all of a sudden look at her differently than they had for so many years from her resurrection. The other person whose backstory was way too late was Bella Talbot. Everybody hated her until you found out she made a deal as a child to get out of an abusive situation. That was a completely different character all of a sudden. So a couple of the backstories, I think, completely changed the character that we had been watching and the fans' attitudes toward the characters. So a couple of these backstories would have served the characters, I think, well, and it was a lost opportunity that we got them too late.
Oh, absolutely. And in both of those cases. And I think that with that also, 2 of the people that I would have loved to have seen more about that we never got more than an episode or so of was Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz and also Delphine from the World War II episode.
Yeah.
There had to have been so much behind. We got a little bit of Dorothy's because we knew the Wizard of Oz story in general terms. Delphine had to have some massive reasons to do what she did.
Yeah.
And I would have loved to have gotten more of that. We actually did have done 3 Badass Women of Supernatural panels on Continual. And again, like you said, everybody loves them because we actually get to dive into the women's stories.
Mhm. Mhm.
So let's look at Jody and Donna as two of the people who did stick around long enough to get some kind of arc. Melissa, what kind of heroine arc do you see for them?
Jody is my hero because she, and this isn't anything taking away from Donna, but Jody gets that supernatural right in her face. Her family is killed, and she has to deal with that. And then she takes all of that knowledge and uses it, not only pays it forward to protect people on her own, but then she teaches Donna how to hunt. And you just get that sense that she's out there not just doing the job of the hunter, but also doing some of the education to help other people help themselves or pay it forward. I love Jody.
Okay.
And I'm glad that she didn't end up dead. I was like, all season 15, I was like, are they gonna kill her? Are they gonna kill her? Are they gonna kill her? Phew, no, they didn't kill her. Yay.
Any thoughts on Donna?
I love Donna. Donna's soft and squishy and still badass, and that's a really cool combination. The other thing that I love about Donna is not, especially at the start when they first cast Donna, she's not traditionally beautiful, but she's amazing. And I think she's beautiful, but she's not Hollywood beautiful. And so I thought that made her even more interesting, because I saw a woman with the same some of the same insecurities and the same hangups that I carry around, and she's still she's a badass cop, and now she's a hunter, and she doesn't let anything get in her way. She's cool too.
Okay. Laurena.
I thought it was a sign of respect from the writers that Jody and Donna weren't killed. I don't know if they thought there would be like a rebellion from the fandom if they were killed, because I think there would have been. But I honestly appreciated that they weren't killed. Yes, they were wayward sisters, and in my thought, kind of put them in a protected category. But I liked very much that they didn't mess with them. They were very well-rounded characters. You got a lot of backstory on both of them. They had very real emotions and reactions. They were real women. They weren't facades. They weren't, as Melissa said, some kind of a Hollywood stereotype. They weren't necessarily the 20-something or the early 30-something. They were people that had different ups and downs in their professional careers. They had fought themselves into law enforcement in a man's world. So they were very well-rounded, respected visions of what a woman hunter or just a woman would be. So I absolutely loved their characters, and their heroine's journey, to answer your question, to me was a matter of education. They just got smarter and smarter in the supernatural world they were thrown in, while still juggling family, while still juggling romance, while still juggling profession, as most women have to do, juggle all those different roles. So their journey, I think, was more one of not so much development of themselves, but development of them becoming hunters, in addition to everything that they had already accomplished in their life.
Yeah, I love that. And I just rewatched the episode where Sam and Dean come to Jody's because Claire thinks there's a vampire. Nobody else believes Claire. And they have that wonderful scene at the dinner table where Jody is giving the girls the sex talk, and Sam and Dean are stuck at the table. And she keeps going, right? And they're like, oh, just leave me out of this. But what you see in that, and Dean even says, sure wish Bobby had said something to us. Bobby never had that conversation with us. And there's a longing there. Nobody ever did. And so that's as much of the preparation for hunting and life as how to shoot a gun and clean and sharpen a blade, is that she's preparing them to go out into the world and not get hurt. And that's something that Sam and Dean's mentors never thought to tell them. So that's a very heroine versus hero kind of thing. Really tough to fight monsters if you're knocked up. Carole.
I think one way, Lorena had some really good points there. And I think one thing I notice about, say, Jody and Donna's journey is they're the ones, since they're the one around the longest, they're the ones that complete more of this actual hero cycle, but they complete it at like twice the speed of a man. Okay, like we see Sam and Dean taking episodes to go through the cycle, but we see them, you know, I mean, in Jody's first episode, she's going from call to adventure to abyss where her family is massacred in front of her, you know, in an episode. So they're dealing with things on a much faster scale. And I think it's partly, as Lorena said, because they're already fully formed people.
Mhm.
Sam and Dean are not fully formed people. Okay, they're not socialized, they're not raised, they're half feral, right?
And they're young at the
And
beginning.
they're young, and they have no, you know, they were raised, as Sam says in the very beginning, they were raised like warriors. Whereas Jody and Donna grew up as regular people. And so they have all of that socialization and they have all of that information, and they just had to grow into the hunter part, which then they do really adeptly, because not only are they fully formed people, they're really competent, you know, cops. I absolutely love, what is it? Is it Hibbing 911 where they're at the conference together? I freaking love that episode, partly because there's the amusement of the two different, they're very different women. They're both hunters now, but they're very different women. And so when they first meet, and Jody's like, oh, she's so cute. And you know, Donna's all like, you know, lollipops and laughing at the cute seminar names and stuff. But they're both really, you know, when they're at that gun display and the guy is like, oh, well, here's a nice little lady's gun. And they're like, dude, you know, showing them they know what they're doing. It's terrific. So they're both really, really strong. And for them to then branch into that whole new area of life is much more manageable. As shocking as it is to them, compared to like somebody just walking off the street, they're already like way through that cycle, and they're already way through that development, and they're, you know, really great because of that.
Okay.
I thought it was interesting that they used Donna to show how strong they were with her relationship with Doug, and that Doug said, I'm out, you know, I can't handle this supernatural stuff, which put in contrast what Donna had to deal with. So not only was she able to deal with the supernatural, but was now going to do it alone because the boyfriend she had said, not for me. So
Doug
they
2.2.
even, yeah, they even
Doug
used,
2.0.
right, they even used the relationship to show that they could do it on their own. And they were stronger than some of the men that weren't in the life.
Mhm.
And yet we also saw that Jody was able to create a found family.
Mhm.
So hunters didn't have to, by default, be alone.
Right.
They-
She never lost her maternal side and all the maternal know-how that she already had from being a wife and being a mother. She never lost any of that. And while Donna was never a wife, well, I guess she was briefly a wife, but you know, she was never a mother or anything, but Donna never lost her sense of wonder and her sense that everything could still have a happy ending, and there was joy. Even in the darkness, there were joyful moments to be had. And so those two things are really valuable in the dark, dangerous world that, you know, the Winchesters exist in.
Which I think it's important with the Jody piece, because we saw very few male hunters that succeeded in having a family. You know, we had John Winchester's A+ parenting. We had Garth, who did end up having a family, but very few others, if you can think of any, who succeeded, whether it was a biological family or a found family. Bobby had a boy.
Ellen's husband had a successful family because he had Ellen and Joe, and they were very happy together and they all loved each other. But then he died. But at least as far as having a family, he was one of the few.
Yeah,
and really, I think anybody else, like even Garth, he got a family, but he got a family after he
got out.
Fired. He stopped being
he'd gotten out.
You know, and look at Jesse and his partner Caesar, you know, and they had a really good relationship, but they were leaving. And you know, the feeling is definitely that if you're going to have any success at this, it ain't going to be in the hunting world, you know.
Yeah.
The flip side would be Asa Fox, who's like, you know, love him and leave him, and his mother tearing her hair out because she always wanted grandchildren.
And still living with his mother. Still living with his mother when he might have been old enough to have an affair with Mary. Something going on here. But yeah, and where there's often a sense, women have often been told that to succeed at something, particularly a masculine something, they're just going to have to forget about that whole family thing. And Jody didn't. And so I think that's noteworthy as well. Laurena, you brought up Mary. So let's talk about Mary and her heroine journey.
Mary had, she was a character that was almost presented as two different people, because the early Mary was the perfect mother in Dean's from Dean's memories. But we didn't really know the background of her being a hunter until the time travel episode. And then you were like, oh, okay. You know, she knew about the Campbells, or she was Campbell, and the Campbells knew about the hunting. And then when they brought her back, they completely rewrote her into this helpless, I can't deal with things kind of person, which was a very bizarre take on who Mary could have been or should have been or was. So I think you almost have to separate the misstep of Mary season 12 all the way up until they gave you the flashbacks in her epilogue, and take that, the epilogue Mary and the original Mary, and say that was the true person. And the one in the middle was the one that they wrote for convenience because they didn't want to give Sam Smith weekly shots in the show, or they couldn't because it was, you know, a Sam Dean cast type of show. So that Mary was almost like a misfit with the characterization as I see it. She was like just an odd person who went off and had affairs and British men of letters and didn't know who she was and was lost. And so either you write that up to your brain gets scrambled when you're brought back from the dead for a while, or you write that off to that was just weird characterization to keep her as a guest star instead of a recurring star.
Well, I've always joked that they had to keep her as a recurring, infrequent star, because it's one thing to have two good-looking guys in a car cruising the country solving, killing monsters. But if you have two unmarried guys pushing 40 living in a basement with their mom, it changes the dynamics. And so I agree. I also think that we saw a very different Mary when she had to grow a pair, so to speak, in the AU and face down Lucifer and emerge as a leader. And all of a sudden, this is not the Mary that ran away from her sons because she couldn't deal with things. Now, all of a sudden, she's competent. So yeah, it was her journey is hard to map because she's all over the place.
It was very, very inconsistent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the jarring different personas that the writers gave us at these various points is really difficult to string a narrative together with. totally get that the original Mary, of course, is idealized because we're seeing it through, the small child's rosy view. But at the same time, we did still at least see her come back as a spirit to protect her boys, and that was something we could deal with. And when we go into the past and find out she was a hunter, she's still a strong person in that, she's carving out her, she made a deal that wasn't the best choice, but she's not,
Well, we saw what happened when she didn't.
Yeah. So when she comes back, when she first came back, I screamed. I was like, oh my God. And I was like, wow, this is going to be so exciting. It was so not. And it was such a terrible letdown. And I found myself watching the screen going, who is this person? And where did they find her? Because she's not Mary Winchester. And pretty much I just kind of had to write her off at that point because I could not reconcile the Mary that we had lived with for all these years, that was this person. And she did, I think, make a comeback in the AU, or at least maybe even if we just say, well, she was floundering and she couldn't deal with anything, but then she found a cause and so she became, Joan of Arc or whatever. But it was such a hodgepodge and it was so poorly scripted that, instead of the hero's journey, hers was like, it was the hero's pentagram or something.
The hero's wandering around in the darkness.
Yeah.
I was one of the few people that liked Mary, even when she came back, because I kept saying, all right, midlife crisis, there are women who just lose themselves for a while and just can't deal. It just all built up and they have to just step back and they have to go find themselves. And so I was like, okay, midlife crisis for a different reason. Most of us don't die and come back to life, but you can't call it a journey, really. It was just kind of a bizarre set of circumstances.
It was staggering.
Yeah.
And I would have respected it if they had presented it in terms of she was overwhelmed and simply had to step back and find her place kind of thing. I would have accepted that. But the whole thing where it's like, you were little boys and now you're not, and I can't deal with that, and so I don't even want to see you, that was completely inexplicable. I couldn't buy that in any way, shape, or form. Just as a mother, I would be like, you know what? I missed all those years. I'm heartsick about it, but here you are now, and I'm going to get to know the men you are. And then if you need to step back because computers and all of that stuff, absolutely, take your time. But rejecting her children because they were now grown and she couldn't, that was the thing, that was the line I could not cross.
Yeah.
Yeah. Melissa?
Unpopular opinion, Mary Winchester is a monster. You know how I feel about John Winchester? 20,000 times worse for Mary. Because Mary was a hunter and she made a deal with a demon. Step one, she did nothing to protect Sam. There were no wards, there were no devils. She did nothing. She had all that time, she could have been educating John, nothing. Then she comes back and she walks away from her boys because boo-hoo, they're grown-ups now. If Mary had been Joan of Arc, I would have cheerfully lit the fire. So yeah, and it's not Sam's fault. She's a great actress. It's like the writers, those bingo hoppers where the balls pop up. It's like the writers took different plot points and wrote them on balls and then stuffed them in the bingo hopper and just let things pop up, and whatever popped up is what they did with her character. So it's not Sam's fault. And if that Mary was, that I feel the way I feel about Mary.
I concur with that. I think whatever they gave her, I think she played the heck out of, and took it as much as she could. But the foundation itself was just so shaky that
So
you can't.
From the start of making the deal that ultimately cost Sam so much agony, just the inner turmoil, forget the physical and the agony that it cost him, to walking out on her boys when she came back because boo-hoo, they're grown up. Nah, that's not a heroine in my book.
Yeah, I would
She's an
extend that.
interesting character, but not a hero.
Now, somebody who didn't get to stay long enough, but we still saw them long enough to find a journey, I think, in their evolution is Charlie. You know, because when we first see her, she's just bopping around in that elevator, and she's brilliant, and she's playing the game by her own rules, and she's 10 steps ahead of everybody, including Dick Roman. And then the Winchesters happen, but she has her own journey. Melissa, what do you think?
I love Charlie, and I love seeing the evolution from, you know, she's just like you said, she's in her own world, she's taking her prisoners, and then she is afraid, right? When she realizes the supernatural stuff, she's afraid, and she does it anyway. And what's the definition of a hero? It's you're afraid and you do it anyway. And so that's Charlie. But then, even though she knows all this supernatural stuff is out there, she's still out there living her life, and she's helping when she can, and she's helping when she's needed. But she's continuing on with her life, and I think that's admirable. I thought I thought they did a great job of developing her until, of course, they kill her off because it's supernatural. She's a woman, so let's just kill her off instead of just letting her go off to be with Dorothy and Oz, or just saying she's off in California doing something cool, surfing on the beach, who cares? So that they could bring her back. Instead, they create AU Charlie, which just not the same.
Yeah, as brilliant as Charlie was, she would not have checked into a motel, parked in front of her room, sat in front of the window when she knew people were trying to kill her. She just wouldn't. So yeah. Carole, what do you think about Charlie's journey?
She's definitely got the hero's journey because, you know, she is called to adventure, and she doesn't even quite know what's happening, but she rolls with it. You know, she realizes what they're saying about, you know, Dick Roman, and she helps them. She certainly transforms, you know, from just a world-class hacker to, you know, a hunter. And she has her own tragic backstory, and we get to see it, and it informs her character even more. We realize how much of her life she's been alone, and here with the Winchesters, they're her family now. You know, she's still independent by all means, but she's not necessarily alone. They are there for her, she is there for them. And that's really important, even if they don't see each other for months at a time. And of course, she provides great opportunities for humor, which, you know, the boys don't get a lot of. And so it's kind of fun for them to do the LARPing and to, you know, hear about all her pop culture adventures and stuff like that. I think her death was a complete waste. You know, yeah, it said, take this extremely, you know, intelligent and capable person and just have them be stupid. Just 24 hours, be stupid, now they're dead, you know. And to me, AU Charlie is just like, why did they even bother? It just was nothing. She could have been anybody. You know, she had the same face, but she could have been anybody, and it just didn't matter anymore. But up until now there was a sacrifice. I mean, not in terms of her sacrificing herself for the Winchesters, but the writers sacrificed her. The writers were just like, okay, somebody's got to go. It's going to be you, you know, and just killed her off in such a ridiculous fashion. But up until then, she was a wonderful hero, and really, really strong character with so many talents that the Winchesters didn't have, and so all complemented really well.
Mhm. Lorena.
As an avatar for the women in fandom, Charlie was probably the most inspirational, I think, out of the badass women, because, you know, absolutely you get Joe or Ellen or Eileen or, you know, any of the other hunters who could handle a gun and went up against ghosts and vampires and werewolves. But people don't do that in their everyday lives. But they do have to go to work, and they do have to deal with corporate world, and they do have to deal with scary situations and guilt over family death and, you know, all those other things, and rise above it. So was, I think, the most inspirational of the heroine's journey that the fandom could relate to, and was written in such a way that she was smart and she was witty and she was independent, and but in a way that could make sense in an everyday life and was positioned in the real world versus, you know, out in a roadhouse or in the woods of Ireland or, you know, wherever it might be that the others were positioned. So yeah, she definitely completed the journey. When she was killed was the only time that her character was not written by Robbie Thompson, and the other writers decided it fit the story better to kill her, and that was just like the dumbest thing in, you know, 15, well, not the dumbest thing, but right up there in the list of dumb things.
Yeah. Well, and you know, in terms of being identifiable to the fandom, you also have, she went to Comic-Con, got a tattoo, got drunk, LARPed, and huh?
And she
Yeah,
was gay.
and she was
You
gay.
know,
And
she was one of the only characters really who was gay. And there's an enormous section of fandom
yeah,
that, you know, identifies with that, you know, and hence a huge outcry when she was killed. And there was, you know, a lot of protesting about that. But
yeah, I mean, we got to see Caesar and Jesse in one episode. We got to see the two guys who fixed copiers in the
Yeah.
convention episode, but they weren't recurring characters. And Charlie was. So yeah, all of those things made her very identifiable to the fandom, and contributed to her journey as well.
Mhm.
So saved maybe the best for last, and this is Rowena. Talk about a journey. Carole?
She got, man, she got such a great journey, because she got to start off as a villain that made everybody quake in their boots. You know, everybody was afraid of her, and she was so powerful, even when she was being funny, you know, when she wanted to start her own mega coven. And so even with the humor, she was nonetheless tremendously powerful. You know, I mean, she and Crowley were fighting. You know, everybody cowered around Crowley, but she sure didn't. You know, and in the end, to get to the point where when she died, the Winchesters were grief stricken, and we were grief stricken. I was grief stricken when she died. And here we are talking, it was a sacrifice. She sacrificed herself, but not just for the Winchester, she sacrificed herself for the world. So we're talking about somebody who went from, I don't care about the world, let it burn, to I'm going to die for the world. You don't transform more than that. And they did it believably, they did it slowly, they did it incrementally, so that every step of the way we could understand why she was going around this arc and what was happening because of it. And it was wonderful. It was wonderful. In the many missteps, and I absolutely love Supernatural. I wouldn't be doing these panels if I didn't. But I'm, you know, we all have our moments. But Rowena was a really unsullied to me, an unsullied character who had a really lovely heroine's journey.
Okay. Laurena.
It's funny because I agree with what Carole said about making Rowena's journey understandable. I'm not a Rowena fan. I thought when she was first introduced, she was very superficial and very much a caricature. You know, if she could have a twirling mustache, that's what I expected to see.
Twirling ringlets instead.
Yes, right. You know, and the mega coven, and I don't know, the humor just completely fell flat for me. So I was not a fan of Rowena's, but it was interesting if you combine her with the other supernatural heroines. Now, Rowena was human, but became a witch that was of such power that you could almost consider her supernatural. And you put her together with like Meg and Amara, who were supernatural and started out as bad guys, as did Rowena. And through association with the Winchesters and the journey they were on, completely turned around and came over to the good side. Then there's a pattern here of Rowena and Meg and Amara, and we could probably go and find a few others who started out bad and became good and likable, and you were rooting for them, same as Sam and Dean were. Then it was that's an interesting journey to me. But as a character, I never felt Rowena was three-dimensional. I always thought, even when they gave her the backstory of Crowley's mom, and then she went down to hell and was heckling him in his court, and every time she was on, it just grated me the way that they wrote her. But her journey was from villain to heroine, and it was very consistent with how they treated other supernatural women.
Okay, that makes a great point about Meg and Amara. Melissa?
I could just say, skip back to what Carole said. I loved Rowena. Her death, falling into the whole, just dagger to my heart, even though I knew she wasn't really dead, but still. I love the way the complex way that they created and developed her character. And there was a point, probably sometime before the episode, where Dean has lost his memory and she's trying to help get it back. And she's being very tender with Dean. And there's just these few moments where you can really see that affection. Somewhere before there, when she starts, hello boys, every time she refers to them as boys, there seems to me to be that silent my in front of it. Like, these were her boys. They weren't Mary's boys. They were, at some point towards the end of the show, they were Rowena's boys just as much as they were Mary's, because she helped them out. She was, yes, frenemy, you could call it that, but she really was on their side. When she said to Sam, she knew because of the prophet book that Stan was the agent of her death. So she couldn't have stabbed herself. It had to be Sam for it to all work. And she said just the right things to him to get him to do it. Did you sacrifice your brother? Nope. Nope, 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 nope. That's it. The world didn't matter. His brother, that was the impetus. And she knew it. And that was that hero step. She knew that she had to die to save the world, and she knew that this was the way that her death was going to occur. She could have just she might as well have driven the dagger into her stomach herself, but she knew that she couldn't, so she got Sam to do it. I love her character. I would love to see more of her, because she was cool.
Well, folks, we have blown through our hour, so it's time to go around and let everybody know where they can find you online, starting with you, Laurena.
For Supernatural on all social media, Win Fam Business for the Winchester Family Business. You can find me on Facebook at Fan Phenomenon Twilight, on Twitter at LSAngel2, the number 2, and on Instagram at Laurena Aker.
Okay, Melissa.
You can find me on Twitter via _Deans_girl. And the art today is by Cameo Docs.
And you hang out a lot in the TFWNC group.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Carole.
I'm here on Facebook as Carole M. Stokes. I'm a lot in the TFWNC group on Facebook. I'm here on continual panels. On Twitter, I am true_firesign10, and all of my fanfic is on AO3 under firesign10. Mind the tags.
And I'm pretty easy to find at gailcmartin.com, morganbryce.com, all the social media is a variation of those. We mentioned the Supernatural TFWNC group. I'm on the Winchester Family Business blog. And of course, I'm here at Continual. So thank you all so much for another wonderful panel and for being fantastic panelists. And thanks to all of you for watching and listening. There'll be more Supernatural coming up soon on Continual. So we'll see you online.